So, Mike, looks like another manager in the running for replacing Moyes is Rafa Benitez, and it's come out recently that maybe he's not too keen on what we're offering, and I think it was the same when he was offered the Leeds position. He turned that down for a similar reason, and yeah, it's come out today, as you can see here, that he turned down an approach by West Ham through intermediaries about short-term availability, and he's only interested in a long-term contract. Now, we don't know how true that is, but it's come from West Ham football, who's pretty in the know with the likes of David Sullivan. So it looks like Rafa's not looking for a short-term stay, and a lot of West Ham fans who want Moyes to go are kind of looking towards a short-term solution until the summer to fix this problem, and then we completely rebuild again in the summer when we have potentially new ownership and just a completely blank canvas to work with. So I guess the first thing to discuss is Rafa Benitez on a longer term contract, say an 18-month to 2-year contract, the best way to go about it if that is kind of the only way we are going to replace Moyes?
So I think what the Rafa Benitez getting offered a short-term deal suggests is that things are changing at West Ham in the summer. If David Sullivan was staying, and bearing in mind this is a manager he's tried to get on multiple occasions, you would envision that a short-term contract wouldn't even be on his mind. It would be you have a contract to the end of the season at X times of wage. You keep us up, there's a bonus. If we go down and you want to stay, like you did obviously with Newcastle, your wage drops by a percentage. If you keep us in the Premier League, then you stay. Maybe it's then a 2-year deal or what have you. Now, I would think that would be an offer we would approach if the long-term view was the incumbent board in its current guise was to remain. I think if Benitez is right, probably to say no to short-term deals. He's done it before with kind of Chelsea. Newcastle was kind of a short-term deal at the time, but obviously progressed into what it was. So I think he's probably right. He's a manager of prestige, so he, quite frankly, should be saying no to short-term deals because he wants to know now that if he takes a job, he's taking a job for the long term. So I think he made the right decision for himself. I wouldn't necessarily say that him rejecting us actually is an outright no to come into West Ham.
Yeah.
I just think it's a no to the current terms of the deal. Whether I think personally it's the right long term, I have serious questions around it. What you could say is, for once, it actually shows that going from Moyes to Benitez in terms of style is relatively similar. So for once, it's not necessarily going to be a huge culture shock to a completely different philosophy, maybe different types of players. I think Benitez will enjoy the fact we've got more technical players.
Yeah.
But I can't say I'm convinced by Benitez long term. He has been out of football for a while. The Everton one didn't go very well. Obviously, we know Everton's a poison chalice anyway at the moment. But who's to say that we're not a poison chalice anyway, for Benitez
Exactly.
again? So it's kind of out of the the chip pan and now directly into a fryer. So he's gone from one terrible situation to another if he kind of makes that move.
In terms of, Rafa Benitez kind of wanting that long-term project and wanting maybe that support that, he's going to get at maybe one club, they'll maybe see a longer-term vision than what we've got at the moment with the uncertainty around Moyes and West Ham's survival. Do you think maybe one way around it could be, okay, you're going to come in until the end of the season. If you keep West Ham in the league, if you get X far in the FA Cup, if you get X far in the Europa Conference League, you're guaranteed at least another season, and you'll get that fixed contract for next season. Do you think that could maybe be some, I don't know, a better way of doing it and a better way of enticing him, rather than just saying you're going to be here until the end of the season and that's it, and then there's no real plan in place for what happens after that? And maybe that is kind of not giving him the immediate 2 to 3 years that straight from the bat, but we then see what he can do in this next 3 to 4 months. And if we like it, and if he's on board with the fans and the fans are happy with it, then you're guaranteed that, at least another year when the summer comes around.
Yeah, I think even framed in that way, it essentially says that we don't have faith in you long term, or we're not convinced as a long term option this is the route we want to go to. Essentially, it's non-committal, and I think you're only non-committal if those at the top maybe don't have faith either in him to move on, or is the fact that they don't want to burden a new board potentially if things happen with then a manager that they don't want, and then they have to get rid of, they have to pay compensation for. So I understand why we're maybe looking at a shorter term deal. And again, I think had if the way I look at it is if they were staying, he would have a short term deal that activates into a longer term deal. That's
Yeah,
how I view it. He'll maybe get offered essentially an 18-month contract, potentially longer, based on the fact that keep us up already activates a 2-year deal, bonus and all that kind of stuff would happen. But the fact that it's a short term deal tells me they don't have a long term vision. They don't necessarily maybe want to pay a higher wage to a manager if we were to go down as well, because Benitez, even if we probably paid about 20 to even 25 to say 50% less, it'd still be a very substantial wage he would be earning. And I just think, to be honest, it's completely split. I think Sullivan's only willing to talk to certain people because he will say that others are at risk,
yeah,
doesn't like paying compensation. He's never, and for those that will say, well, he's paid off other managers in the past, we know that. But what he hasn't really done, and what I'm pretty sure he's never done in his history in football, is paid for a club to release a manager from their contract.
yeah,
So he's only going to look at what he feels is safe, and that's going to be managers who have some level of Premier League experience. Rafa obviously does have that in abundance. They took to him at Newcastle, but while some people, I believe, would say, oh, it's a safe pair of hands, we also do need to remember that as well as he did with Newcastle, he did also take them down first time round.
yeah,
No real fault of his own. It was a bad Newcastle team,
yeah,
but largely that team that went down is kind of what he brought back up with him, and then he developed. But it was never the most scintillating football. Now, people may can blame Mike Ashley and so on, but it was very pragmatic. These are the things that we are struggling with. And if people remember when we watched Newcastle play against us under Rafa, we weren't complimentary either. So it's, do we want to go to a function over style approach, or would we rather have a bit of style and function?
yeah,
I think if we go with Rafa, you're going very much for function, which arguably in our current situation is right, because
yeah,
we are struggling. Really, arguably at both ends of the pitch. If you look at that Tottenham game, it's a tricky one. Personally, my head says no. My thoughts, as I've told you before, is that I think now we're in a point where playing it safe is pointless. We are better off taking a risk. That means even going for a manager who doesn't have experience in the Premier League, and maybe a complete departure of what we need. I think we need something completely fresh, totally fresh. No burden of what has come before or burdens of experience already in the Premier League. I think a completely different approach to bring something completely fresh in, new ideas, new philosophies could be something that rejuvenates the club.
yeah,
The problem is, as I said, that because of the potential long-term future of the board is why we're looking at short-term options. I don't believe you're looking at short-term options because they're worried about getting relegated. Because if that was the case, you look for a manager who is potentially in the championship that's doing well and saying, regardless, win, lose, or draw in terms of relegation, you come into the club, you keep us up, brilliant. You're our manager next year. If we get relegated, you're our manager next year, but you're in the
yeah.
championship.
I think it's a bit of that as well. I think it is a bit of the fact, like someone like Rafa has got that Premier League experience, and if he does come in, it's not a completely different approach because they're similar in how they approach things with Moyes and Benitez, but it's a different set of eyes. It's a different manager. It's something that might just tweak a little bit between now and the end of the season that will keep us up. And I think that's the biggest problem we have right now is we are nearly into March. Like it's not like it's just before the World Cup, where most people were saying, oh, this might be the best time to replace Moyes, where we have that month period where we can maybe do something like you're mentioning, where we go with someone a bit more of a risk. But the further we get down the line, the more that risk of survival, is getting worse. And bringing someone in like Rafa becomes more of a probability, just because of, you can't really, it's hard to justify making a massive risk at that point of the season, especially when you've got someone like David Moyes, who they, in their eyes, would bring in this situation if we were in it, and they have done in the past, on 2 occasions. So I think it's going to be tough for the board if they do get rid of Moyes. I think that is one problem they're having. I think in the back of their mind, they probably realised that Moyes isn't going to be able to progress us much more, and we are declining under Moyes. But on the alternative is, what is there out there right now that we can, safely bank on to keep us in the Premier League? And I think in their minds, Rafa Benitez is that man. Whether they can get him on that short-term deal, it looks like not with his comments, and it looks like not with our approach. So I guess, just to wrap this up, would you be happy if hypothetically Rafa did come in for Moyes and was maybe given a bit more of a longer term deal?
As I said on the last stream we did, in all honesty, now I'm at a point where I don't care who is in the dugout. All I care about now is that we start getting points, because
Yeah,
in the summer things need to change.
yeah,
Now, that's either, if Moyes stays, he needs to completely change his approach, because there are clear problems in the dressing room, and we have to not only go big in the transfer market like we did this year to bring in all the players that are going, but if you look at the ones that are also annoyed, we're
yeah,
arguably then looking at basically having to do a Nottingham Forest almost, and bringing in probably like 14 players
yeah,
to replace all of the unhappy ones, to replace the players that are old, replace the players that are leaving on a free, just to have a squad. So the summer represents a big change. Now, I just look at it as I don't really care at the moment who's in the dugout. I don't want Moyes there. All I want is a clear message as to, come hell of high water, this is now our option to the end of the season.
yeah,
Quite frankly, I've seen it before where we've got rid of a manager like Roda, brought in Trevor Brooking, and we did have a bounce, and we went down that year with the biggest ever points total of any team, with 42 points.
yeah,
But during that period, we played some good football. We looked like West Ham, and we did play well, and we were unlucky in the end. But, are we going to do that now? Probably not. We're not going to. If we do that, that means maybe Noble. Quite frankly, I don't think it matters who comes in. The problems are the problems, and we
yeah,
need to get in the points is more important. I do not care who comes in as a manager really at this point, because as far as I'm concerned, in the summer things have to change. So they can put a traffic cone in there for all I care. As long as that cone's getting us 3 points, it's just where I just have so little concern or even bothered about who they bring in.
yeah,
As long as it's someone who gets us through to the end of the season, and even if that's Moyes, fine, but just stop the speculation. Make a decisive decision
yeah,
and get on with it. So then we can all, as a fan base, just stop the
yeah,
the Moyes in, Moyes out. So we can just stop that crap and just actually just get behind something. I'm not getting behind Moyes, quite frankly, because I don't see the point. I don't see him being there in the summer. I get behind the team. I don't care about getting behind the manager. I I my patience, my time has gone for him. I just want to get behind the team and
mhm,
have a decision, right? Kind of very definitive decision as to who is going to be in that dugout, and it needs to happen after that Nottingham Forest game. There needs to be a very clear message, one way or another. Our manager is going to be
yeah,
either a new one or this manager to the end of the season.
yeah, definitely. And I think again, the further this season has gone on, the more we've kind of dwindled into that territory of, we just want an answer now. We don't want to keep having this cycle of, oh, Moyes gets a point. We've got another 3 games. Let's see what happens. We could, turn it around in a few games. We might be up to 14th, 13th. Time's running out for that. We're 18th with 15 games left to go. So is Rafa Benitez the answer? We don't know. It looks like he's rejected us on a short-term deal anyway. So if we are going to get him, it's going to have to be a bit of a longer commitment. But then there are question marks over what's going to happen in the summer with the board and just the club in general. So survival is key. Survival is the main thing. And at this point, I think every West Ham fan is just hoping that we can get that survival. And regardless of who does it, and we just, retain our Premier League status and maybe give Europa Conference League a little bit of a go. But let's know your thoughts. Would you be happy with Rafa Benitez, especially on a longer term deal? Do you think he could, provide something different that Moyes isn't currently providing? Or do you think it would be pretty similar to what we're seeing at the moment? Let us know in the comments. Leave a like on the video, subscribe as always. And Mike, one thing left to say. Come on, your irons.